She is shy, reserved, and used to creating intense love stories on paper. He is confident, observant, and dangerously gifted at noticing everything she tries to hide. Between long conversations, barely concealed tension, and a game of teasing that goes a little too far, this story proves that sometimes the greatest chaos begins in the most irresistible way. The fork slipped out of Paige Holloway's hand and clattered against the plate loud enough to make 3 people look up. She wasn't clumsy. Not usually. But the man standing at the entrance of the restaurant had just stolen every ounce of coordination from her body. Claire grabbed her arm under the table. That's him. That's Ryan's best friend. Paige picked up the fork with the dignity of someone pretending it never fell. You didn't say he looked like that. I absolutely did. You said he was tall. He's 6'5". That qualifies. You left out several important details, Claire. Her best friend grinned the way she always did when she knew she'd won something. You'll thank me later. Nathan Holland crossed the restaurant like a man who didn't notice that a woman at table 9 had stopped chewing mid-bite to watch him walk. Ryan stood up and pulled him into one of those half-hug, backslap greetings that men do when they actually love each other. Then Ryan turned him toward the table, and Paige felt the full weight of his attention land on her for the first time. His eyes were the color of strong coffee. That was the first thing she noticed, not because she was a writer who catalogued details for a living, but because those eyes looked straight at her like he already had a question he wanted to ask. Nathan, this is Paige, the one who writes the books. The famous ones, Claire added, because Claire never missed an opportunity. Nathan extended his hand. His palm was warm and rough in a way that told her he did more than sit behind a desk. I've heard about you for weeks. Ryan talks about Claire. Claire talks about you. I feel like I already owe you a coffee. She shook his hand and noticed her own disappeared inside it. All good things, I hope. Depends on your definition of good. The corner of his mouth lifted, not a full smile, just the start of one, like he was saving the rest for later. If this story is touching your heart, show your support. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Every action helps us keep bringing you new stories full of emotion. They sat. He ended up across from her because Claire had arranged the seating with the subtlety of a freight train. And for the next 2 hours, Paige learned 3 things about Nathan Holland. First, he listened like an architect should, taking in the whole structure before focusing on any single detail. When she mentioned her latest deadline, he didn't ask what the book was about. He asked if she was sleeping enough. The question caught her off guard, and her dimples showed before she could stop them. Second, he had a voice that did unreasonable things to the back of her neck. Low, unhurried, with just enough gravel in it to make her lose track of sentences. Third, and most dangerously, he was funny. Not loud funny, not trying to impress funny. The kind of funny that slipped in quietly and detonated 3 seconds later, when she'd already moved on, and suddenly had to cover her mouth to keep the wine from coming out. So you build things and I make things up, she said at one point, trying to sound casual. We're basically opposites. Or the same thing from different angles. He leaned back, turning his water glass slowly between his fingers. I design spaces people haven't lived in yet. You write lives people haven't lived yet. Both require imagining something that doesn't exist and convincing someone else it's real. She stared at him. That wasn't what she expected from someone who spent his days arguing with contractors about load-bearing walls. Under the table, Claire's shoe pressed against hers. A signal. Paige ignored it. By the time dessert arrived, a tiramisu they were all supposed to share, Paige noticed something she couldn't quite name. Every time she spoke, Nathan's gaze didn't wander. It stayed. When she reached for her glass, his eyes tracked the movement and returned to her face like a reflex. It wasn't staring. It was attention, real, deliberate attention, and it made the air between them feel thinner. He noticed things too. When she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit she'd had since college. When she laughed and turned her face slightly to the left, as if laughter was something private she kept trying to hide. He noticed, and he said nothing. Walking to the parking lot, Ryan and Claire fell behind, their fingers laced together, giving the night exactly the kind of ending Claire had planned. Paige wrapped her jacket tighter around herself. The October air in Portland had teeth. Cold? Nathan asked. He didn't wait for an answer. His jacket landed on her shoulders, heavy, warm, smelling of cedar and something clean she couldn't identify. She looked up at him, way up. The top of her head barely reached his chest. "I'll give it back. Keep it as long as you want." She didn't know what to do with that sentence, so she smiled, tight-lipped, dimples hidden, and kept walking. That night in bed, with his jacket still hanging on the back of her desk chair, because she'd forgotten to return it, or chosen not to, she opened a blank document on her laptop. The cursor blinked. She typed one line and deleted it, typed another, closed the laptop, stared at the ceiling. She could still smell cedar. Nathan had redesigned office towers, museums, a waterfront pavilion that won a regional award. None of those projects required the concentration it took to sit across from Paige Holloway at a coffee shop and pretend he wasn't watching her lips move when she read sentences back to herself. 4 weeks since that dinner. 4 weeks of a friendship that made no sense on paper and perfect sense in person. It started with the jacket. She texted the next morning to say she still had it. He told her to bring it to the cafe on Burnside. She showed up with it folded neatly over her arm and a look like she'd been rehearsing what to say. He ordered her coffee before she sat down, oat milk latte, no sugar, extra foam, and she forgot whatever script she'd prepared. "How did you know my order?" "Claire told Ryan. Ryan told me." That was only half true. Claire had mentioned it once in passing. He'd remembered it the way he remembered load measurements, automatically, because it mattered. After that, the excuses to see each other piled up like drafts on her desk. Monday mornings she wrote at the cafe. He started showing up with his sketchbook, claiming the light was better there. It wasn't. His office had floor-to-ceiling windows he'd designed himself, but the cafe had her, hunched over her laptop, chewing the inside of her cheek when a scene wasn't working. Lunches became a habit. He'd text at noon, and she'd appear at whatever place he suggested, always slightly out of breath like she'd walked too fast. He didn't mention that. He liked it too much. Dinners happened when neither of them wanted the conversation to end. He'd cook at his apartment, nothing fancy, pasta or grilled chicken, and she'd sit on his kitchen counter because the stool was too tall, and she didn't want to admit it. Her feet dangled. He pretended not to find it devastating. The phone calls were the worst, or the best. He couldn't decide. They'd start about nothing. A funny sign she saw, a client who wanted a spiral staircase in a bungalow, and end 90 minutes later, his dinner cold, her tea forgotten. One night, the call stretched past midnight. Her voice got softer, slower, and he realized she was falling asleep. He stayed on the line for another 11 minutes. He counted. She never mentioned what she wrote about, not the details. She'd say the draft is fighting me, or I rewrote the same page 6 times but never read him a line. The way her ears turned pink when the subject got too specific told him there was a boundary there, drawn in invisible ink. He respected it, but the curiosity buzzed under his skin. What neither of them said, not once, was that this wasn't just friendship. Every accidental touch, every time her knee bumped his under a table, every moment their eyes held a beat too long, carried a weight that neither addressed. She'd look away first, always. And he'd let her, because pushing Paige before she was ready would be like opening a door by kicking it. You'd get through, but you'd ruin the frame. So he waited. He waited through movie nights where she fell asleep against his shoulder. Through walks in the Pearl District, where her hand brushed his and neither of them closed the gap. Through a moment in his kitchen when she reached past him for a glass and her hip pressed against his thigh, and every intelligent thought he'd ever had left the building. Ryan saw it. Ryan had known him since college and could read his moods like Nathan read blueprints. "You're gone, man," Ryan said, tossing a basketball in the driveway. "I've never seen you like this." "Like what?" "Like you'd rearrange your whole week around a coffee." Nathan caught the ball and held it. "She's different." "Yeah." Ryan grinned. "That's exactly the problem." On a Friday evening, Claire's name exploded across the group chat. Ryan had proposed. A photo of Claire's trembling hand, ring catching the light, followed by 17 exclamation points and a voice message that was 90% screaming. Paige called Nathan before she called anyone else. He answered on the first ring. "Did you know? He's been carrying that ring for 2 weeks. I almost told you 3 times. I would have ruined the surprise immediately. I know. That's why I didn't. She laughed. Quick, warm, slightly breathless. He pressed the phone harder against his ear. Claire wanted a celebration. The girls were going out Saturday night, a downtown bar, loud music, drinks they'd regret. Paige, who drank maybe twice a year and considered a glass of wine adventurous, agreed, because she could never say no to Claire. Saturday morning, Paige stood in front of her closet and pulled out a black dress she'd bought a year ago and never worn. Simple, fitted, ending just above her knees. She held it against herself in the mirror. Her phone buzzed. Nathan. Have fun tonight. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. She typed back without thinking. That leaves a pretty wide range. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared, appeared again. Wider than you think. She put the phone down, picked up the dress, felt her pulse in her fingertips, and told herself it was just excitement for Claire. It wasn't. The bass from the speakers hit Paige's chest before she even walked through the door. The bar was packed. Saturday night energy, neon signs reflected in cocktail glasses, laughter layered over music that made conversation a competitive sport. Claire led the group like a general marching into battle, her engagement ring catching every light in the room, her smile wide enough to power the whole block. Tonight, Claire announced, sliding into a booth, nobody goes home sober. That's the rule. I don't think that's a good rule, Paige said. It's a perfect rule. You just don't know it yet. There were 6 of them. Claire, Paige, Jess, who was already ordering shots before anyone sat down. Mara, who had opinions about everything and a voice that carried over any crowd. Becca, who was quiet until her second drink, and then became the funniest person in any room. And Sophie, who had been friends with Claire since kindergarten and treated every celebration like a personal mission. The first drink appeared in front of Paige without her ordering it, something pink with sugar on the rim. What is this? Happiness, Claire said. It tasted like strawberries and regret waiting to happen. Paige sipped it carefully, then less carefully. The warmth spread through her chest like a slow sunrise, softening the edges of the noise and the crowd and the self-consciousness she carried everywhere like a second purse. The second drink was Jess's idea. The third was her own. By the fourth, the world had tilted slightly on its axis, and Paige Holloway, best-selling romance author, woman who triple-checked every text before sending, felt like someone had finally turned off the alarm system in her brain. She danced. She never danced. Claire grabbed her hands and pulled her to the tiny space between the booth and the bar where people moved to the music, and Paige let herself be pulled. The rhythm was easy when she stopped thinking about it. Jess whooped. Mara took a video. Becca laughed so hard she spilled her drink on Sophie's shoes, and Sophie didn't even care. It was somewhere between the 4th drink and the 5th that the idea arrived, not gradually, not with warning. It landed in her brain fully formed, like a plot twist she hadn't planned, the kind that showed up at 2 in the morning and refused to leave. Nathan. She needed to tell Nathan something. Several things. Important things that she'd been carrying around for weeks like stones in her pockets, weighing her down every time she looked at him, and smiled instead of speaking. She pulled out her phone. The screen swam a little. She typed with one eye closed for accuracy. I need to tell you something. Sent. Actually, multiple things. Sent. Then the typing felt too slow, too small for what was building inside her. She hit the microphone button and started recording. Nathan. Okay. Listen. I've been thinking and I can't stop thinking and you need to know that I... She paused, giggled at nothing and kept going. You're so unfairly good-looking. Like it's rude. It's rude to the rest of the population. And I'm tired of pretending I don't notice. She sent it. Recorded another. Also your hands. I think about your hands more than a normal person should. Just so you know. And another. And I'm scared to tell you this, but I haven't. Okay, I'm a virgin, which is not something I announce at bars normally, but apparently tonight is different. The messages stacked up on his screen like a confession written in real time. And then, because the voice memos weren't enough, because the courage was still rising and the filter was completely gone, she called him. He picked up on the second ring. Paige, don't talk. Just listen. I'm in love with you. I've been in love with you, and it's very inconvenient because you're my almost best friend, and you have those stupid shoulders, and I can't think straight when you stand too close. Silence on his end. She could hear him breathing. And I know I said I'm a virgin, which I am, but I would, with you, because your body looks like it was drawn by someone who really, really knew what they were doing. Like a very talented artist. A genius, probably. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. And one more thing. Her voice dropped to what she probably thought was a whisper but was not. I'm at this tattoo place next to the bar. It's open all night, and I'm getting your name tattooed. Right now. Right here. A rustling sound. Well, right here on me. Below my belly button, where the, the underwear line. Nathan pulled the phone away from his ear, looked at the screen, looked at the ceiling, put the phone back. Paige, which studio? What's the name? She laughed like he'd told the best joke in the world. It's called, hold on, Midnight Ink. Cute name, right? The guy doing it is really nice. He said the lettering would look beautiful in cursive. Stay there, don't move, I'm coming. Are you mad? No. Just stay exactly where you are. He grabbed his keys from the counter. His hands were not steady. The drive from his apartment to downtown took 12 minutes. He made it in 8. The neon sign for Midnight Ink buzzed faintly above the door, casting a blue glow onto the wet sidewalk. Nathan parked crookedly and didn't care. He pushed through the entrance, and the smell of antiseptic and ink hit him immediately. He scanned the room. She was in the second chair from the left, sitting up now, legs swinging off the edge like a child on a park bench. The tattoo artist was peeling off gloves. The plastic wrap was already on. Done. He was too late. Paige spotted him, and her entire face changed. The smile that spread across her was the most unguarded thing he'd ever seen on a human being. No performance, no filter. Just pure, drunk, uncomplicated joy at the sight of him. Her dimples sank deep into her cheeks. You came. She hopped off the chair and crossed the room at a speed that shouldn't have been possible in heels and that level of intoxication. Before he could brace himself, she threw her arms around his neck and jumped. Her legs wrapped around his waist. Her face buried into his neck. He felt her breath warm against his skin, and then her voice, muffled and delighted. You smell so good. You always smell so good. What is that? Is it soap? It's unfair if it's just soap. He caught her on instinct, one arm under her, one hand flat against her back. She weighed nothing. Or maybe she weighed everything. Paige. You tattooed my name on your body. She said it like she was confirming a lunch order. Wanna see? Not right now. It's really pretty, cursive. He closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, the tattoo artist was watching with the expression of a man who had seen a lot of things at 2 a.m, but was still mildly entertained by this one. Nathan adjusted her weight on his hip. She had zero intention of letting go, and looked around the studio. The collective scene was remarkable. Jess was in another chair, admiring a small butterfly on her wrist with the focus of someone studying a masterpiece. Mara had what appeared to be a tiny moon behind her ear. Sophie was photographing Becca's new ankle tattoo, while Becca repeated, "My mother is going to end me," between fits of laughter. Claire sat in the waiting area, legs crossed, fresh ink on her inner forearm, Ryan's initials inside a small heart, looking entirely too pleased with herself. "Did all of you get tattoos?" Nathan asked the room. "Group decision," Claire said brightly, "very democratic." Nathan shifted Paige to one arm. She made a small noise of protest and then settled against his shoulder like she belonged there and pulled out his phone with his free hand. He called Ryan first. "Your fiancée is at a tattoo parlor downtown with your initials on her arm and about 4 cocktails in her system." Ryan's sigh was audible through the speaker. "Which studio?" "Midnight Ink on 5th. "On my way." Then he called Mara's boyfriend, then Becca's, then Sophie's. Jess was single, but had already texted her sister, who lived 3 blocks away. One by one, the cavalry arrived. Ryan walked in first, took one look at Claire's forearm, and laughed the kind of laugh that said he was going to love this woman forever, and also never let her live this down. Mara's boyfriend, a quiet guy named Derek, simply held out her coat and guided her toward the door with a hand on her lower back. Becca's boyfriend carried her out because she'd taken off her shoes and refused to walk on the cold floor. Through all of it, Paige stayed exactly where she was, attached to Nathan like gravity was a personal choice, and she'd chosen him. "You can put me down," she mumbled at one point. She didn't loosen her grip. "I know. I'm comfortable. I know that too." Ryan looked at Nathan, looked at Paige, half asleep on his shoulder. His eyebrows said everything his mouth didn't. "We are absolutely talking about this later." Nathan carried her to the car, set her in the passenger seat gently, like she was something breakable he'd been asked to deliver safely, pulled the seatbelt across her chest and clicked it. She caught his hand as he pulled away. "Thank you for coming." Her voice was softer now, sleepy. The bravado from the phone call had faded into something smaller and more honest. "I'll always come." He said it before he could think about whether he should. She smiled with her eyes closed. His chest ached like someone had pressed a thumb into the center of it. He drove to his apartment. Not hers, because hers was across the river and she was already half asleep, and because taking care of her felt more important than being appropriate. He made chamomile tea in the quiet kitchen, the only sound the kettle and her breathing from the couch. She drank in small sips, her hands wrapped around the mug, his oversized grey t-shirt hanging off her shoulders and reaching her knees. He handed her a pill for the headache that was coming. She took it without arguing. He walked her to the bedroom, pulled back the covers. She climbed in and sank into his pillow with a sound that did something complicated to his self-control. "Stay," she whispered. "I'm right here." He sat in the armchair by the window, pulled a blanket over his legs, watched her hair spread across his pillow, dark against the white cotton, watched her cheeks flush pink from the warmth, watched her breathe. His name was tattooed below her belly button in cursive, under plastic wrap and warm skin. He pressed his palms against his eyes. He did not sleep. The pillow smelled like cedar. That was the first thought. Before memory, before logic, before the headache that sat behind her eyes like a tenant who'd moved in overnight. Cedar and something clean, familiar, not hers. Paige opened one eye. The ceiling was wrong, too high. The window was on the wrong side. The sheets were grey, not white. And the pillow she'd pressed her face into like it owed her comfort, was definitely, unmistakably his. She sat up too fast. The room punished her immediately. The memories didn't come all at once. They came in waves, each one worse than the last. The bar, the pink drinks, the dancing. Claire's ring catching the light, then the phone call. "No," she whispered. The voice memos, the confession, the word shoulders, the word virgin, the very specific description of his body involving the phrase very talented artist. No, no, no. The tattoo. She lifted the hem of the oversized grey t-shirt, his t-shirt, and looked down. There it was, just below her belly button, covered in clear film, slightly red at the edges. Nathan, in cursive, delicate, permanent, and absolutely real. She pulled the sheet up to her nose and made a sound that was part groan, part prayer, part seriously considering whether the bedroom window opened wide enough for an adult woman to fit through. The legs. She had wrapped her legs around his waist. In public. In a tattoo studio. While telling him he smelled good. She was going to have to move to another state, maybe another country. Somewhere without cell service or tattoo parlors. Footsteps in the hallway. She froze. Nathan appeared in the doorway holding a mug. Steam curled from the top. The smell reached her before he did. Coffee, strong, with something sweet underneath. He was wearing a white t-shirt and sweatpants, and his hair looked like he'd run his hands through it a few too many times. His eyes had the faint shadow of a man who hadn't slept, but he was smiling. Not a kind, sympathetic smile. Not an "are you okay" smile. A smile that said he had been waiting for this moment since approximately 3 in the morning and intended to enjoy every second of it. "Morning." He leaned against the doorframe. "How's the head?" "Fine," she lied. Her voice sounded like gravel. "The pill should have helped. I left water on the nightstand around 4, but you were out cold." She glanced at the nightstand, empty glass. She hadn't even noticed. He crossed the room and set the coffee in front of her. She wrapped both hands around it and took a sip, strong, with foamed milk and a spoon of honey. Exactly right. How did you know? You always order it that way. She stared into the mug, because looking at him felt dangerous. He settled against the doorframe again, arms crossed. The position made his shoulders stretch the cotton in a way that she absolutely refused to notice this early in the morning. So, he said, do you want to talk about your speech last night, or should I just replay the voice memos? There is nothing to talk about. Right. Because your body looks like it was drawn by a genius is just casual conversation. The heat climbed from her chest to her neck to her ears. She could feel it spreading like ink in water. I was drunk. People say stupid things when they're drunk. Stupid things. He nodded slowly. So the part about being in love with me, that was stupid. I didn't say that. You absolutely said that. You also said my shoulders were stupid, which I'm still processing. Nathan. And then there's the tattoo. His voice stayed light, but something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of something warmer, heavier, that he tucked away almost immediately. I'm flattered, honestly. Most people just send a card. She picked up the pillow and threw it at his head. He caught it with one hand, laughing. A real laugh, the kind that came from deep in his chest and made the corners of his eyes crease. She hated that laugh. She loved that laugh. She wanted to record it, and also never hear it again. Everything I said was the alcohol talking. None of it was real. The lie tasted bitter, and she hoped he couldn't see through it. He could. She knew he could because the laughter softened into something quieter, and he looked at her for a moment too long, the way he sometimes did across the cafe table, the way that made her feel like he was reading a page she hadn't meant to leave open. But he didn't push. Okay, he said simply. Whenever you're ready to eat, there's toast and scrambled eggs in the kitchen. Take your time. He turned and walked down the hallway. She listened to his footsteps fade, heard a cabinet open, heard the low sound of a radio being turned on. She looked down at the tattoo again, his name on her skin, in the most intimate spot she could have chosen. The worst part wasn't that she'd done it. The worst part was that looking at it didn't make her want to undo it. It made her feel claimed in a way she'd only ever written about, and that terrified her more than any hangover ever could. She drank the coffee he'd made exactly the way she liked it. Then she got up and went to face whatever came next. 3 days later, Nathan walked into a bookstore on his lunch break and changed the entire dynamic of their relationship with a single purchase. He hadn't planned it. He was picking up a gift for his mother's birthday, a cookbook she'd mentioned, something about French pastry, when he passed the fiction display near the entrance. A name caught his eye. Paige Holloway. The cover showed a couple in silhouette, the kind of tasteful design that suggested romance without being obvious about it. The title was After Midnight. He picked it up and flipped to the back. A #1 bestseller. Praise from 3 publications he recognized. He turned it over in his hands, impressed and curious in a way that prickled. He bought it. That evening, he started reading on the couch with a beer and every intention of skimming a few chapters. 2 hours later, the beer was warm and untouched, and he was on page 163, where the main characters were in a scene that made him set the book flat on his chest and stare at the ceiling. Paige Holloway, shy, dimple-cheeked, can't maintain eye contact Paige Holloway, had written something that would make a grown man blush, and she'd done it beautifully. The tension on the page was architectural, every word load-bearing. He picked up his phone. Page 163. Does your editor know you write like this? Her response took 4 minutes. He imagined every second of those 4 minutes, the phone lighting up, the color draining from her face, the frantic internal debate. You bought my book? I'm reading your book. Different emphasis. Page 163, Paige. We need to discuss page 163. We absolutely do not. The part where he pins her against the bookshelf. Is that structurally accurate? As an architect, I have concerns about the weight distribution. No response for 7 minutes, then I'm blocking your number. She didn't block his number. What followed was a week-long campaign of cheerful torment that Nathan enjoyed more than any project he'd ever designed. He read a chapter each night and texted her observations that walked the thinnest possible line between literary analysis and flirtation. Chapter 12. The rooftop scene. Very detailed for someone who claims to work entirely from imagination. Do you do research for these field trips, asking for professional curiosity? Your hero just said something on page 210 that I definitely said to you last Tuesday. Should I be concerned or flattered? Each message turned her into a shade of red he could picture perfectly, even through a phone screen. At the cafe where they still spent mornings together, she refused to meet his eyes for entire stretches, while he sat across from her with the book open on the table, reading with a straight face that was itself an act of war. Stop reading that in front of me. Why, I'm a fan, I'm allowed to read in public. You're doing it on purpose. Doing what? He turned a page with exaggerated slowness. I'm just enjoying literature. She threw a sugar packet at him. He let it bounce off his shoulder without breaking eye contact with the page. But the teasing had a second layer, one he was more careful with. Every time he mentioned the tattoo, casually, sideways, as if it were a footnote, she shut down, changed the subject, crossed her arms. The playfulness drained out of her, and something guarded took its place. He learned the boundary fast. The book was fair game. The tattoo was not. What he didn't know, what she would never have told him, was that every night after his last message she opened her laptop and wrote, not the contracted book, not the sequel her publisher was expecting. Something new, something that had no outline, no deadline, no plan. The protagonist was an architect, tall, dark-eyed, hands that made her think of someone specific every time she described them on the page. His smile sat crooked on his face. He drew buildings that hadn't been built yet, and paid attention to details that most people missed. She wrote him the way she saw Nathan, in fragments, in moments, in the things he did when he didn't know she was watching. The heroine was a woman who kept people at arm's length with humor and silence, who was braver in fiction than in life, who carried a secret on her skin that she wasn't ready to explain. Paige saved the file without a title. She closed the laptop and pressed her fingers against the place below her belly button where his name lived, permanent and warm under her fingertips. She was writing their story. She knew it, and she couldn't stop. Rain had been falling over Portland for 3 straight days, the kind that turned the city into a blur of grey and headlights and the smell of wet pavement seeping through every crack in every window. Paige loved it. Rain was writing weather. She could sit in the cafe for hours with her laptop and a second latte and disappear into sentences while the world dissolved outside the glass. She'd lost track of time. That happened more often now, especially when she was writing the new book, the one without a title, without a contract, the one that felt like peeling off her own skin and handing it to someone who didn't know they were holding it. The cafe had emptied around her. The barista was wiping down tables with the slow rhythm of someone hoping she'd take the hint. Her phone buzzed. Nathan. Still at the cafe? Maybe. It's pouring. Did you bring an umbrella? She looked at her bag. Laptop, notebook, 3 pens. A granola bar she'd forgotten about. No umbrella. She never brought an umbrella. It was one of those things she planned to fix about herself and never did, like flossing regularly or learning to parallel park. I'm fine. I'll wait it out. You said that 2 hours ago. I'm coming. She started to type a protest. He was already offline. 12 minutes later, his car pulled up to the curb. She saw it through the rain-streaked window, the dark grey SUV she could recognize by now from a block away, the headlights cutting through the downpour. He didn't honk, didn't text, just sat there, waiting, because he knew she'd see him. She packed her bag, thanked the barista, and pushed through the door into the wall of water. She was soaked in 4 steps. By the time she yanked open the passenger door and dropped into the seat, her hair was plastered to her face, and her jacket was useless. You're unbelievable, she said, pulling the door shut. The sudden silence of the car, no rain hitting her skin, just the muffled drumming on the roof, made her voice sound louder than she intended. You're the one who forgot an umbrella. Again. I didn't forget. I made a choice. A bad one. A brave one. He reached behind his seat and grabbed his jacket, the same one from that first night, the one that smelled like cedar. He dropped it around her shoulders without asking. The warmth settled into her instantly, heavy and familiar. Thank you, she said quietly. He didn't answer right away. He was looking at her, not at the road, not at the rain, not at the rearview mirror, at her. A strand of wet hair clung to her cheek, curving along the line of her jaw and ending just above her lip. She hadn't noticed it. He reached over and lifted it gently with his thumb, tucking it behind her ear. His fingertip grazed the edge of her earlobe, barely a touch so light it might not have counted, and his hand stayed there close to her face, not quite pulling away. Her breath stopped. Not dramatically, not like in the book she wrote. Just stopped, the way air stops moving before a storm shifts direction. The laughter that had been in his eyes all evening was gone. Something else had taken its place, something focused, something that made the space between them shrink until she could feel the warmth radiating off his skin. His gaze dropped to her mouth. She felt it like a touch, like his eyes had weight. He leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to move, to speak, to break the tension with a joke or a deflection, or any of the 100 escape routes she usually took. The rain hammered the roof. The windows had fogged from their breathing, turning the world outside into a grey nothing. Inside the car the air was thick and warm and charged with something that had been building for weeks and was now pressing against the walls of every careful boundary they'd built. She could smell him, cedar and soap and rain. She could see the faint line of his jaw, the way his throat moved when he swallowed. She could hear his breathing, slow and deliberate, like a man trying very hard to stay in control of something that was slipping. And then she turned her face, not sharply, not dramatically, just a small rotation to the right, enough to break the angle, enough to redirect his trajectory from her lips to the empty air beside her cheek. She cleared her throat, a tiny sound that felt enormous in the silence. Nathan sat back, slowly. His hand dropped to the steering wheel. He looked straight ahead at the fogged windshield, at the blurred shapes of parked cars and streetlights that meant nothing. He turned the ignition. The engine hummed to life. He reached for the defrost. The fan whirred. Neither of them spoke. The drive to her apartment took 8 minutes. She counted every one. The radio was off. The only sounds were the wipers and the rain, and the careful, measured breathing of two people, pretending they hadn't just stood at the edge of something and backed away. When he stopped in front of her building, she gathered her bag and his jacket and held it out to him. "Keep it," he said. His voice was normal. Almost. There was a thread of something pulled tight underneath it, but he tucked it away so neatly that someone who didn't know him might have missed it entirely. "Nathan." "Good night, Paige." She opened the door. The rain hit her immediately. She ran to the awning, turned back, and watched his taillights disappear down the street. Inside her apartment, she dropped her bag by the door. She was shaking, and it had nothing to do with being wet. She changed into dry clothes, made tea she didn't drink, and sat on the edge of her bed staring at the wall. Then she opened her laptop. She wrote for 4 hours straight. She wrote the scene in the car, every detail, every sensation, every atom of the tension she'd felt and fled from. She wrote it the way it should have ended, the way she'd wanted it to end, the version where the woman didn't turn away, where his lips landed on hers, and the fogged windows became the most romantic thing in the world, instead of a reminder of what she'd been too afraid to let happen. It was the most intense scene she'd ever written, and it was entirely, painfully true. Over the next 3 weeks, the pattern established itself with the stubborn persistence of something neither of them could control. They moved closer. Then she pulled back. Every time. At the cafe, his knee rested against hers under the table for 20 minutes before she shifted in her chair and angled herself away. He didn't comment, just kept sketching. During a movie at his apartment, her head found its way to his shoulder during the second act. His arm lifted, almost, to wrap around her, and she sat up suddenly, reaching for the popcorn she didn't want. One Sunday, walking through the farmer's market, she slipped on a wet patch of concrete, and he caught her by the waist, both hands. She felt every finger through her sweater. Their faces ended up close enough to share breath. She laughed, too loud, too fast, and stepped back, pretending to inspect a basket of apples. He held her hand once. At a dinner with Ryan and Claire under the table, hidden by the tablecloth. His fingers laced through hers and she let them stay. For the entire main course, they sat side by side and held hands like teenagers while carrying on separate conversations with their friends, and it felt like the most intimate thing Paige had ever experienced. When dessert arrived, she let go to pick up her fork. She didn't reach back. Each time, she retreated to the same safe distance, close enough to feel him. Far enough to pretend she didn't. Nathan didn't push. He never pushed. But she saw something tighten in his expression each time she pulled away, a flicker of patience being tested, of wanting held on a leash that was fraying at the edges. He'd recover in seconds, slip back into a joke or a casual comment, smooth the surface of the water as if nothing had disturbed it. But something had disturbed it. Something was always disturbing it. And what he didn't know, what she barely admitted to herself, was that the pulling away had nothing to do with not wanting him. She wanted him so much it frightened her. But underneath the want, buried deep, was a fear she couldn't name out loud, that he'd discover she had no experience, that the woman who wrote those scenes with such detail and heat had never lived a single one of them, that the passion on the page was imagination, not memory, and that when the moment came, if it came, she wouldn't know what to do with her own body. She was afraid of being not enough. So she kept writing the version of herself that was brave, and she kept living the version that turned away in cars on rainy nights. Nathan, alone in his apartment after each of these retreats, sat with the silence she left behind. He replayed every hand held and dropped, every gaze met and broken, every centimeter of space she put between them like a wall made of air. He didn't know about the fear. He only knew the distance. And he was starting to wonder if the distance was her answer. Her name was Vanessa Caldwell, and she walked into Nathan's office on a Tuesday morning like she already owned the place. Nathan didn't think much of it at first. New clients came through every month. This one wanted to redesign a mixed-use building near the waterfront, residential units above, retail below, the kind of project his firm handled well. She'd been referred by a colleague, and her portfolio of properties suggested she had the budget and the ambition to match. The first meeting was professional, clean. She knew what she wanted, asked smart questions, and respected the timeline he outlined. He liked working with people who didn't waste his time. The second meeting was less clean. She showed up without an appointment, just appeared at reception in a tailored coat and heels that clicked against the concrete floor of his studio like a metronome. She had a question about the floor plans, she said. Something that couldn't wait for email. It could have waited for email. Nathan answered her question in 7 minutes. She stayed for 40. Leaned against his drafting table while he walked her through the revised layout, standing closer than the blueprints required. Asked about his other projects, his background, how long he'd had the firm, whether he always worked this late. "I work until the design is right," he said. "Sometimes that's late." Dedication. I like that in the people I work with. He registered the tone, filed it under client management and moved on. But Vanessa kept appearing, a Thursday lunch meeting that she extended by suggesting they continue the discussion over coffee. Her Friday drop-in to approve material samples that turned into an hour of conversation, she steered away from architecture and toward personal territory. She asked if he was from Portland, if he had family nearby, if he was seeing anyone. "I keep my personal life personal," he said. Polite, final. She smiled like she'd heard a challenge instead of a boundary. Nathan mentioned her to Ryan in passing, not as a concern, but as an observation. "Clients getting familiar?" Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Familiar how?" "Shows up without scheduling, stays longer than necessary, asks questions that have nothing to do with the building. Is she attractive? That's irrelevant." "So yes." Nathan didn't laugh. "She's a client. I don't mix those lines. Ever. I've told her as much without telling her as much, and I'll be more direct if I need to be." What Nathan didn't account for was the reach of a well-placed photograph. The team dinner happened on a Friday, a quarterly thing he did with his staff. 8 people around a table at a restaurant in the Pearl District, talking shop and blowing off steam. Vanessa was there because the project had reached a milestone, and it was standard practice to include key clients in these dinners. She sat at the far end of the table, 3 seats away from Nathan. At some point during dessert, someone took a group photo. Standard. Forgettable. But Vanessa took her own version, a shot from her angle that captured only half the table. In it, Nathan was mid-laugh, looking in her general direction, and she was next to the frame's edge with a glass of wine and a smile that implied something the moment didn't contain. She posted it that night. No caption except a location tag and a single emoji that could mean anything or everything. Paige saw it at 11:40 on a Friday night, curled on her couch in an old college sweatshirt, scrolling through her phone with the mindless rhythm of someone avoiding sleep. She didn't follow Vanessa, but Claire did. Claire followed everyone, collected social media connections like baseball cards, and Claire had liked the photo, which pushed it into Paige's feed through the algorithm's quiet cruelty. She tapped the image, expanded it. Nathan, laughing, looking beautiful in that effortless way that made her chest hurt. And beside him, almost beside him, the framing made it ambiguous, a woman Paige had never seen. Dark hair, red lips, confident posture. The kind of woman who looked like she belonged next to a man like Nathan. The kind of woman who probably didn't turn away in cars during rainstorms. Paige stared at the photo for a long time. She checked the woman's profile. Vanessa Caldwell, real estate developer. The grid was full of sharp outfits, city views, and the cultivated ease of someone who moved through the world without apology. There were other photos, a building that looked like one of Nathan's designs, a construction site tagged with his firm's name, a coffee cup on what might have been his drafting table. Each image landed like a stone dropped into water that was already too still. Paige set the phone face down on the couch. She pressed her palms against her thighs and breathed. It's work, she told herself. He has clients, he has dinners. This is what professionals do, but the voice underneath, the one she could never silence, the one that whispered in the dark when she was alone, said something different. It said, look at her. Look at what she is. Confident. Experienced. A woman who doesn't freeze when someone leans in. A woman who wouldn't need to explain that she's never been touched. The insecurity wasn't new. It lived in Paige the way old furniture lives in a house. Always there, mostly ignored, impossible to remove without tearing up the floor. But tonight it woke up. Tonight it had a face and a name and a red-lipped smile. She didn't call Nathan, didn't text, didn't ask. Because asking meant admitting she cared in a way she hadn't officially declared, and admitting she cared meant risking the answer she couldn't survive. What if he said yes? What if he said, she's just more my speed, Paige. I need someone who doesn't run every time I get close. She couldn't hear that sentence, not from him, not ever. So she did what she always did when the world pressed too hard against her chest. She closed up, quietly, like a bookshop pulling down its shutters at the end of the day. No announcement, no drama, just the gentle click of a lock turning. Saturday morning, Nathan texted her. Cafe at 10? I found a new pastry place that does those almond things you like. She read it twice, typed and deleted 3 responses, settled on, can't today, deadline stuff, rain check. He sent back a thumbs up and didn't press. Sunday, he called. She let it ring to voicemail. Texted 20 minutes later. Sorry, was in the shower, what's up? Nothing important, just wanted to hear your voice. She stared at those words until the screen dimmed. Then she typed, crazy week ahead. Talk soon. Talk soon. The 2 most dishonest words in the English language. Monday, she cancelled their cafe morning. Tuesday, she was busy with edits. Wednesday, his name lit up her phone 3 times, and she responded to one with a sentence so short it could have been written by a stranger. Nathan felt the shift the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. Something was different, something was wrong, but the sky still looked the same. He replayed their last conversation, their last meeting, searching for whatever he'd said or done or missed. He found nothing, because there was nothing. The problem wasn't something he'd done, it was something she'd seen, and something she'd believed without ever giving him the chance to tell her she was wrong. By Thursday, Nathan had stopped pretending the silence was normal. 5 days. 5 days of half-answers and cancelled plans, and the particular kind of quiet that doesn't mean peace. It means someone has left the room without closing the door. He'd run every conversation back like a tape on rewind, looking for the moment he'd stepped wrong. There was nothing. 1 week they were holding hands under a tablecloth at dinner, and the next she was a stranger who happened to know his coffee order. He sat in his office staring at an elevation sketch he should have finished 2 hours ago. The pencil was still in his hand. He hadn't drawn a single line. Ryan appeared at the doorway. "You've been staring at that wall for 20 minutes. "I'm thinking. About the Caldwell project?" "About Paige." Ryan leaned against the frame. He had that look, the one that meant he knew more than he was saying. "Have you talked to her?" "She won't let me. Every time I reach out I get a sentence back, maybe two. She cancelled Saturday, she cancelled the cafe. She barely picks up the phone." "So go to her." Nathan looked up. "And say what? Whatever's true." The drive to Paige's apartment took 14 minutes. He used every one of them to prepare something reasonable to say, something measured, something that respected whatever she was processing without making her feel cornered. By the time he parked, he'd rehearsed 3 different openings, all calm, all rational, all built on the assumption that he could control this conversation the way he controlled a design meeting. She opened the door and every rehearsed word evaporated. She was wearing a grey sweatshirt that swallowed her whole, and glasses she only wore when she'd been crying, and her contacts irritated her eyes. Her hair was pulled back in a knot that was falling apart. She looked small and tired and like she'd been carrying something heavier than she was built to hold. He'd seen her dressed up. He'd seen her laughing, flushed, radiant in ways that made it hard to think. But this version of Paige, raw, unguarded, standing in her doorway with red-rimmed eyes and no armor left, hit him somewhere so deep he forgot how to be casual. "Can I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. Her apartment was quiet. A candle burned on the kitchen counter, vanilla, the kind she liked when she was stressed. Her laptop sat open on the couch, the screen dark but warm, as if she'd just closed it. A blanket was piled in the corner of the sofa, where she'd clearly been curled up. She didn't offer tea, didn't offer to sit. Just stood by the kitchen island with her arms wrapped around herself, watching him with an expression that was part defiance and part exhaustion. "What happened?" he asked. "Nothing happened." "Paige, I've been busy, I told you. The deadline. You've had deadlines before. You've never disappeared." The word landed. She flinched just barely, a small contraction of her shoulders that someone less attentive would have missed. "I'm not disappearing, I needed space." "From me?" She didn't answer. That was its own answer. Nathan took a breath. The calm he'd prepared for the car was gone. What replaced it wasn't anger, it was something closer to ache, a bone-deep tiredness of wanting someone who kept slipping through his fingers like water through a crack in a dam. "This week was the worst I've had," he said. His voice came out quieter than he planned. "Not because of work, not because of anything that should matter, because you weren't there, and I don't know why, and you won't tell me, and I'm standing in your kitchen trying to figure out what I did wrong." Her chin trembled. She pressed her lips together hard, the way she did when she was trying to lock everything inside. "You didn't do anything wrong. Then why does it feel like you're punishing me for something?" "I'm not—" Her voice cracked. She stopped, swallowed, tried again. "I'm not punishing you." He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps. Not fast, not aggressive, deliberate, the way you approach something fragile that might shatter if you move wrong. He stopped in front of her. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at him, close enough that he could see the wetness gathering at the edges of her lashes. He raised both hands and cradled her face. His palms covered her cheeks entirely. His thumbs rested just below her eyes, where the skin was thin and warm and damp. "This week without you," he said, and his voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper, rough at the edges, stripped of every joke and every shield he usually carried. "It was the worst. I need you to hear that." She heard it. She felt it vibrate through his hands into her skin, felt it settle in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. Her eyes filled. Her hands came up and wrapped around his wrists, not pulling him away, just holding on like someone gripping the edge of something they were about to fall from. He leaned in. She felt his breath on her mouth. Warm, unsteady. His forehead touched hers, and the world shrank to the space between their lips. A distance so small it barely existed, a distance that would take nothing to close. She wanted to. Every nerve in her body screamed forward. Every cell begged her to let go, to stop thinking, to fall into him the way she fell into her own stories. Completely, recklessly, without the safety net of a backspace key. But the voice was still there. The quiet, cruel one. The one that said he'd been at dinner with a woman who didn't need to be convinced to be brave. A woman who didn't carry around inexperience like a suitcase full of rocks. A woman who wasn't afraid of her own skin. Paige pressed her palms flat against his chest. Gently, not a shove. A request. She pushed him back. "I can't," she whispered. "Not right now." His hands dropped from her face, slowly, like letting go cost him something physical. He stepped back. One step, then another. His expression didn't close. That was the worst part. He didn't get angry, didn't go cold, didn't throw up the walls she expected. He just looked at her with something so honest it made her want to take it all back. The distance, the silence, the push, and tell him everything. The photo. The woman. The fear that lived under her ribs like a second heartbeat. But the words wouldn't come. They never came when she needed them. They only came on the page where it was safe, where she could delete and rewrite and control what she revealed. In person, she was defenseless, and being defenseless in front of him was the one thing she couldn't survive. "Okay," he said. Just that. One word. No argument, no plea, no attempt to change her mind. Just acceptance, offered like an open hand she refused to take. He walked to the door, opened it, paused without turning back. Then he left. Paige stood in the kitchen until she heard the elevator doors close down the hall. She sat on the floor, back against the island, and pulled her knees to her chest. The candle flickered. The apartment smelled like vanilla and his cologne, and she hated that the two scents together felt like the truest thing in the room. That night, for the first time since they'd started talking, she checked her phone before bed and found nothing. No message, no good night. No joke, no teasing, no casual line that meant more than it pretended to. The screen stayed dark. She set the phone on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling until the candle burned itself out. Ryan called on a Sunday morning, which was unusual. Ryan was not a morning person. Ryan on a Sunday before noon meant something was either very wrong or very urgent. "We need to talk," Ryan said. No greeting, no build-up. Nathan was at his drafting table, where he'd spent most of the weekend pretending to work. The apartment was too quiet without her voice filling the spaces. On the phone, on the couch, in the kitchen, asking if he'd ever learned to properly season a pan. He hadn't realized how much noise she added to his life until it stopped. About what? About why Paige has been avoiding you. Nathan set his pencil down. "She told you." "She told Claire. Claire told me. That's how this works. You know that. Information travels through Claire the way water travels downhill, naturally and without anyone's permission." "What did she say?" Ryan paused. Not for drama. Ryan didn't do drama. He paused because what he was about to say mattered, and he wanted to get it right. "She saw a photo online from your team dinner, the one with the Caldwell project. Your client posted something that looked close, closer than it was." Nathan closed his eyes. The dinner, the group photo. Vanessa and her phone and her calculated angles. There's nothing there, Ryan. There has never been anything there. I know, you know, but Paige doesn't know because Paige didn't ask. She saw a beautiful, confident woman in a photo with you and decided she already knew the answer. Nathan pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose. The frustration wasn't directed at Paige. It was directed at himself for not seeing it, for not connecting the withdrawal to any specific moment, because he'd been too busy running through his own behavior, looking for mistakes he hadn't made. That's why she pulled away, the cancelled plans, the short messages, all of it. All of it, Ryan confirmed. And there's more. More? She's not just insecure about the photo, man. She's insecure about herself. About being... Look, Claire's going to hurt me for saying this, but you need to understand. Paige thinks she's not enough. Not experienced enough. Not bold enough. She writes these incredible stories about passion and intimacy, and she's never lived any of it. And she's convinced that a man like you, they're her words, not mine, would eventually want someone who doesn't freeze up every time things get real. The apartment was very still. Nathan could hear the clock on the wall. He could hear his own pulse. She said that? She cried saying it to Claire last night. Nathan stood up so fast the drafting stool rolled backward and hit the wall. He grabbed his keys from the counter. I'm going over there. Good. That's why I called. He was in the car, engine running, pulling out of the parking garage when the phone rang again. Ryan. Again. What now? Ryan's voice had shifted. Softer. Careful. The voice of someone delivering news they wish they didn't have. Claire just texted me. She was on the phone with Paige this morning. Paige is looking into getting the tattoo removed. She's trying to book a consultation for laser removal this week. Nathan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The leather creaked under his grip. She wants to erase it. She thinks keeping it is pathetic. Her word. She thinks holding onto a tattoo with the name of someone who, in her mind, is moving on is the most embarrassing thing she's ever done. And Paige Holloway does not handle embarrassment well. She handles it by eliminating the evidence. Nathan didn't answer. He ended the call and drove. Portland passed outside the windows in a blur of bridges and brick and overcast sky. He ran 2 yellow lights and didn't care. Every traffic stop felt like a personal insult from the universe. When he reached her building, he didn't buzz. The front door opened as a neighbor was leaving, and he caught it, took the stairs 2 at a time to the 3rd floor and knocked. No answer for 8 seconds. Then the sound of footsteps, the lock clicking, the door opening just wide enough to frame her face. She looked better than Thursday. And worse. The crying was done. Her eyes were clear, her glasses gone, her hair down around her shoulders. But there was something resigned in her expression, a quiet surrender that was harder to look at than tears. Nathan, are you removing the tattoo? The words came out before he could soften them. No hello, no preamble, no charming deflection or careful lead-in. Just the question, raw and direct, delivered with a voice that didn't sound like his. Lower, rougher, stripped of every layer of composure he usually wore. Her lips parted. She blinked. How do you... It doesn't matter how I know. Are you doing it? She stepped back. He stepped forward. The door closed behind him. They stood in her hallway, the narrow one with the coat hooks and the framed print of the Oregon coast, and the air between them vibrated with something that had been building for too long to contain. It's my body, she said quietly. My decision. You're right. It is. His jaw worked. He looked at the ceiling, then back at her. When his eyes found hers, there was no teasing in them, no playfulness, no trace of the man who'd joked about page 163 and bookshelf weight distribution. This was the version of Nathan that lived underneath all of that, unguarded, serious, and so honest it almost hurt to witness. But I need you to know, that tattoo means something to me. Not because of my ego, not because I think it's funny or flattering or a good story to tell. It means something because you put it there. Drunk or not, you chose my name. On your skin. In a place nobody else gets to see, and the thought of you burning it off because you think I don't... He stopped, swallowed. Because you think I want someone else. That's what I can't let stand. Her back was against the wall, not because he'd cornered her. She'd moved there on her own as if the hallway wasn't big enough for everything she was feeling. The woman in the photo, she started, is a client, Vanessa Caldwell. She hired my firm 6 weeks ago. She's persistent, I won't pretend otherwise. She's pushed boundaries and I've held every one of them. That dinner was a team event, 8 people, Paige. She cropped a photo and posted it, because that's what she does. I cannot control what she puts on the internet. But I can tell you, and I am telling you, there is nothing. There has never been anything. I treat her the way I treat every other client who writes a check and expects good work. He said it without rushing, without over-explaining, without the defensive energy of a man who's been caught. Just facts, laid out like blueprints on a table, clean and precise. Paige pressed her back harder against the wall. Her fingers curled at her sides. I should have asked you, she said. Her voice was small, not weak, small, the way a voice gets when it's carrying something too large for its size. Instead of assuming, instead of disappearing, I should have just asked. Yeah, he nodded. You should have. No softening. No, it's okay, because it wasn't entirely okay. The week of silence had cost him something. and he respected her enough not to pretend it hadn't. But his eyes were gentle. His hands hung at his sides, open, not clenched. "I created a problem that didn't exist," she whispered. "You believed a fear instead of asking a question. There's a difference." She looked at him for a long time. The hallway light was warm and amber, and it caught the edges of his jaw and the dark of his eyes, and she thought, not for the first time, that she could describe this man in 1,000 pages and still miss something essential. "I won't remove it," she said. He exhaled. It wasn't dramatic, just a slow release of something he'd been holding in his chest since Ryan's second phone call. A tension that unwound quietly, like a fist opening. "Good." That night, after he'd gone home and she was alone again, Paige picked up her phone and cancelled the consultation. The receptionist asked if she wanted to reschedule. She said no, said she wouldn't be needing it. She set the phone down and pressed her hand against the tattoo through the fabric of her sweatpants. His name, warm under her palm. It stayed. Nathan came back the next evening. No announcement, no text, asking if it was okay. He just showed up at her door with takeout from the Thai place she loved, the one across the river that she always said was too far to order from. And a look on his face that said he was done pretending the last 2 weeks hadn't rearranged something fundamental between them. She opened the door and saw the bags in his hand. "You drove across the river for Pad CU. You like it with extra lime." I remembered. She let him in. They ate on her couch with the containers between them, chopsticks crossing over the same box of spring rolls, and for the first time in days, the silence wasn't loaded. It was just silence, the comfortable kind, the kind that only exists between people who don't need to fill every gap with sound. He told her about a project going sideways, a client who changed the window specs 3 times in 1 week. She told him about her editor's latest note, which suggested her protagonist needed more vulnerability, as if the man on the page wasn't already falling apart in every chapter. They didn't talk about the hallway, about the photo, about the tattoo. The air had cleared enough to breathe, and neither wanted to stir it back up. Not yet. Not tonight. But something had shifted. She could feel it in the way he looked at her, not with the playful distance of the last few months, but with something more direct, more certain, as if the conversation in her hallway had burned away some final layer of pretense, and what remained was just him, looking at her like she was the answer to a question he'd stopped trying to ask. Around 9, she stood and stretched. The sweatshirt rode up just enough to reveal a sliver of skin above her waistband, and she tugged it down with the reflex of someone who knew exactly what was underneath. "I need a shower," she said. "I've been writing all day and I feel like a gremlin." "Take your time, I'll clean up." She hesitated at the hallway entrance. "You'll stay?" The question was small, almost nothing. But the way she asked it, looking at him over her shoulder with those brown eyes that always said more than her mouth was willing to, told him it wasn't really about the shower. "I'll be right here." She disappeared down the hall. A moment later, the water started running, muffled through the walls, a soft, steady sound that filled the apartment like white noise. Nathan gathered the takeout containers, folded the paper bag, wiped the coffee table with a napkin, because he was the kind of man who cleaned surfaces that didn't belong to him. Then he sat back on the couch, and his eyes landed on the laptop. It was open. The screen was dark, but not asleep. The cursor blinked faintly at the bottom of a page dense with text. She must have been writing when he knocked. She'd closed the lid halfway but hadn't shut it, and when he sat down, his knee bumped the couch cushion hard enough to nudge the screen fully open. He didn't mean to read it. That was the truth, and it mattered to him because Nathan Holland did not invade people's spaces uninvited. But the first line was right there, bright against the white screen, and it contained a detail so specific that his brain processed it before his conscience could intervene. His hands were too large for the coffee cup, and she watched his fingers wrap around the ceramic the way a person watches something they want to memorize. His hands, the coffee cup, the cafe on Burnside where he held his cup exactly like that, every single morning. He read the next line, and the next. The architect in the story drew buildings that hadn't been built yet. He had a crooked smile that appeared slowly, like a door opening 1 inch at a time. He was tall enough that the woman had to tilt her entire head back to look at him, and when she did, the angle made her feel like she was looking up at something she wasn't sure she deserved. Nathan scrolled up. His chest tightened with every paragraph. The rainy night was there. The car with fogged windows, the strand of hair lifted from a cheek, the almost kiss that ended with the woman turning away, and the man driving home in silence. It was exact. Every detail preserved like a photograph. The sound of the wipers, the cedar smell of the jacket, the way the man's hand dropped to the steering wheel like something heavy he couldn't hold anymore. The cafe mornings were there. The way he sketched while she typed, the knee touching hers under the table, the unspoken language of two people orbiting each other with the gravitational pull of something neither had agreed to name. The phone call was there, not the exact words. She'd translated the rawness into something more sculpted, more precise, but the feeling was identical. A woman confessing to a man she wasn't ready to lose. Her voice thick with courage that came from a bottle and feelings that came from somewhere much deeper. He kept reading. The woman in the story was afraid, not of him, of herself, of being seen without the armor of fiction, of being touched by someone who might discover that the author of those fearless burning pages was a person who had never been held the way she wrote about being held. Nathan set his hands flat on his knees. He read until the water stopped running. Then he sat very still, staring at the screen, and waited for her to come back into the room and find him exactly where she'd left him. Except now he was holding a piece of her she'd never meant to give. Her hair was still damp. She'd changed into clean leggings and a loose sweater that hung off one shoulder, and she was toweling the ends of her hair with one hand when she rounded the corner into the living room. She saw him. She saw the screen. She saw the expression on his face. She stopped so completely it was as if someone had pressed pause on her entire body. Nathan. He looked up. His eyes were dark and full of something she couldn't catalogue. Not anger, not amusement, not the easy warmth she was used to seeing when he looked at her. This was deeper. This had edges. How long have you been writing this? Her mouth opened, closed. The towel slipped from her hand and landed on the hardwood floor with a soft thud that sounded like a verdict. It's a draft. It's not finished, it's not... The car scene, the rainy night. His voice was steady but low, the kind of low that meant he was holding something back with both hands. You wrote it exactly the way it happened. The jacket, the fogged windows, the way you turned your face. She pressed her back against the hallway wall. The apartment felt smaller than it ever had. It's fiction. Page. One word. Her name. But he said it the way you say something you've been carrying in your mouth for weeks, careful and heavy, and it landed in the center of her chest. He stood. The laptop stayed open on the couch behind him. He didn't move toward her, just stood there, in the middle of her living room. This man who was too tall for her apartment and too present for her composure, and who had just read every secret she'd hidden in sentences, meant for strangers. The man in this book is me. Not a question. Not an accusation. Just a fact, laid out the way he laid out blueprints, precisely without apology. The hands, the coffee, the smile, the way he notices things about her that she thinks nobody sees. That's me. She couldn't breathe, not properly. The air was coming in short, shallow pulls that did nothing for the pressure building behind her ribs. And the woman, he continued, quieter now. The woman who's braver on the page than in the room, who writes about being touched like she knows every detail but has never... He stopped, swallowed. His jaw tightened and released. That's you. Silence. The kind of silence that has texture, that you can feel on your skin like humidity or cold, the kind that exists only in the space between a question and an answer that will change everything. How does it end? He asked. She blinked. A tear she hadn't felt building slid down her cheek. I don't know. I haven't written the ending. What do you want the ending to be? The question broke something open, not violently, gently, the way ice breaks on a river in spring. Slowly at first, then all at once, the edges softening until the current underneath finally moves. Everything I said that night, she whispered. Her voice was wrecked, thin and trembling and honest in a way that cost her something she could feel leaving her body. On the phone, drunk, at the tattoo studio. All of it. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. It was true, every word. I was in love with you then, and I'm in love with you now, and I have been terrified every single day that you'd figure out that the woman who writes those scenes doesn't know the first thing about living them. Her voice cracked on the last word. She pressed her lips together and looked at the floor. Nathan crossed the room, not slowly, not cautiously, not with the measured patience he'd been exercising for months, giving her space, waiting for signals, respecting distance. He crossed it the way a man crosses a room when he's done waiting, in 3 steps that covered the gap between who they'd been pretending to be and who they actually were. His hands found her face, both of them. His palms cradled her jaw, his fingers sliding into the damp hair at her temples. He tilted her face up until she had no choice but to look at him. His thumbs traced the tracks of her tears. His forehead touched hers. "You're enough," he said. The words were rough, almost broken, as if they'd been sitting in his chest for so long they'd grown roots, and pulling them out hurt. "You've been enough since the first dinner, since the fork you dropped and the dimples you tried to hide, and the way you looked at me like I was a sentence you were trying to figure out." A sound escaped her, half laugh, half sob. It pressed against his chin because they were that close, sharing the same air, breathing the same breath. "I don't care about experience," he said. "I care about this. About you showing up in my morning and my last thought at night, and the way my entire week falls apart when you're not in it." She closed her eyes. His hands were warm on her face. She could smell him, cedar and soap and rain and something underneath that was just him, just Nathan, the scent her body had memorized before her mind gave it permission. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I. Not with you. Not like this." She opened her eyes. He was right there. Close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his dark irises, close enough to count the faint lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. He wasn't smiling now. He was looking at her with an intensity that made her knees feel unreliable. She didn't turn away. For the first time, she didn't turn away. He kissed her. Slow. So slow that the first touch of his lips against hers was barely there. A question asked in the smallest possible voice. She answered by pressing forward, her hands coming up to grip the front of his shirt, pulling him closer with a strength that surprised them both. The kiss deepened. His hand slid from her jaw to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her wet hair. She tasted like mint toothpaste and salt from the tears she hadn't finished crying. He tasted like the jasmine tea they'd shared after dinner, warm and faintly sweet. She made a sound against his mouth, small, involuntary, something between relief and hunger, and he felt it travel through his entire body like a current finding ground. He kissed her the way he designed, with attention to every detail, every angle, every point of contact, the corner of her mouth, the curve of her bottom lip, the place where her breath caught and her fingers tightened on his shirt. When they finally separated, it was only by inches. Her forehead stayed against his chin. His arms had moved from her face to her waist, wrapped around her like he was holding something he'd been reaching for across a very long distance. "That," she said, breathing hard, "is going in the book." He laughed, a real laugh, deep and surprised and warm. She felt it vibrate through his chest into hers. "Only if I get to approve the final draft." She smiled against his collarbone. The dimples appeared, hidden in the curve of his neck, where only the warmth of his skin could feel them. The laptop screen glowed softly from the couch, the cursor still blinking at the end of a story that finally knew where it was going. She made him wait, not out of cruelty or games or the kind of strategic distance she'd practiced before. She made him wait because she needed to arrive at the door on her own terms, with her own hands steady, her own breath even, her own decision made in the quiet hours when no one was watching. Nathan didn't push. He kissed her goodnight at her door, and each kiss lasted longer than the one before, his mouth learning the shape of hers, his hands settling on her waist like they'd been built to fit there. He kissed her forehead when she pulled away, kissed the corner of her mouth when she smiled, kissed the tip of her nose once, just to see the dimples appear. He waited, and the waiting didn't feel like patience. It felt like devotion. 4 days after the first kiss, she texted him at 9 in the evening. Just 3 words. Come over. Stay. He was at her door in 20 minutes. She opened it wearing a soft cotton shirt and nothing on her feet, and her eyes held something he'd never seen in them before. Not fear, not hesitation. Certainty. Quiet and warm, and wholly hers. She took his hand and led him down the hallway. The bedroom was dim, a single lamp on the nightstand. The sheets were clean and smelled like lavender. The window was cracked open, letting in the distant murmur of Portland at night, sirens far away, the hush of rain that had stopped an hour ago, the occasional car passing on wet pavement. He stood in front of her and waited for her to set the pace. She reached for the hem of her shirt. Her fingers trembled just barely. She pulled it over her head and stood there, arms at her sides, looking up at him with the bravest expression he'd ever seen on any human face. His eyes moved down. And there it was, his name, in delicate cursive, below her belly button just above the line of her hip. The skin around it had healed completely, smooth, warm, permanent. The ink was dark against her pale skin, and the sight of it hit him somewhere so deep he had to close his eyes for a second to keep from unraveling. He knelt. Slowly, the way you kneel before something sacred without being told to. His knees hit the floor and his hands found her hips, and he pressed his lips against the tattoo, gently, reverently. He felt her stomach contract under his mouth, felt her fingers slide into his hair, felt her breath shudder above him. He kissed his own name on her skin, and it felt like a vow made before the actual vow, a promise written in a language that didn't need words. When he stood, her eyes were full. He was careful, impossibly deliberately careful, with her nerves, with her skin, with every part of her that she'd kept hidden behind book pages and deflection and humor. He moved slowly. He asked without asking, reading her body the way he read spaces, attentively, with respect for what each inch was telling him. When she tensed, he paused. When she softened, he continued. When she whispered his name, he answered by holding her closer. She discovered that the fear she'd carried, of not knowing enough, of being too inexperienced to match the words she wrote, dissolved the moment he looked at her like she was the only real thing in the room. He wasn't performing. He wasn't comparing. He was present entirely, as if the world outside that bedroom had stopped existing and the only architecture that mattered was the space between their bodies. Afterward, she lay with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow down. His arm was around her, his thumb tracing circles on her shoulder. The lamp was still on. Neither of them moved to turn it off. "Are you okay?" he asked. His voice was rough and quiet, the voice of a man who had just been undone and was still finding his way back. More than okay. He pressed his lips to the top of her head. She felt the kiss settle into her scalp, like warmth sinking into cold ground. "I want to tell you something," he said. She tilted her face up. "I've designed a lot of things, buildings, spaces, structures that will outlast me, but nothing I've ever made has felt as right as this, as you." She didn't cry. She smiled, slow, full, dimples and all, and kissed the center of his chest, right where his heart was loudest. They fell asleep with the lamp still on. Her hand rested over the tattoo. His hand rested over hers. 7 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon that looked like every other Tuesday afternoon, Nathan Holland reached into his jacket pocket and changed the rest of their lives. The cafe on Burnside was quiet. Afternoon light stretched across the wooden tables in long golden stripes. 2 lattes sat between them, hers with oat milk and extra foam, his black, and the familiar arrangement of their parallel work filled the table. Her laptop open, his sketchbook flat, their silence comfortable and full in the way only shared silence can be. She was mid-sentence. Something about a chapter revision. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, her bottom lip caught between her teeth, the way it always was when a word wouldn't come. He set the small velvet box next to her coffee cup. She didn't see it at first. Her eyes were on the screen. Then her hand reached for the latte, and her knuckles grazed the velvet, and she looked down. The world stopped typing. "Nathan, I've drawn things my whole life," he said. His voice was calm, but his hands were not. They rested flat on the sketchbook. and she could see the faint tremor in his fingers, the only crack in the composure of a man who controlled everything except what she did to him. Buildings, bridges, rooms that didn't exist until I put them on paper. But the best thing I've ever designed, the only one I want to keep building for the rest of my life, is a future with you. She opened the box. The ring was simple. A single stone, round and clear, set in a thin gold band. Nothing extravagant. Nothing loud. Just exactly right. The way everything he chose for her was exactly right, because he paid attention to who she actually was, instead of who he thought she should be. Her vision blurred. She laughed through the tears, a sound so bright and sudden that the barista looked up from the counter. "Is that a yes?" he asked. The corner of his mouth was twitching, the crooked smile fighting to break through. "That's a yes," she said, and the dimples that appeared on her cheeks were the deepest he'd ever seen them. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. She grabbed his face with both hands and kissed him across the table, knocking her latte sideways. Neither of them cared. The wedding was small. 32 people in a garden behind a restored farmhouse outside Portland, with string lights and wildflowers and the sound of an acoustic guitar drifting through the October air. Claire stood beside Paige, crying before the ceremony even started. Ryan stood beside Nathan, steady as always, holding the rings in his pocket like the most important delivery of his life. Paige walked toward him in a dress that was simple and ivory, and caught the light like something out of a painting. Her father held her arm. Her mother was already in tears in the front row. Nathan watched her come. He didn't blink. He didn't look away. He watched her the way he'd watched her since the first dinner, with the focused, quiet attention of a man who understood that some things deserve to be studied carefully before you dare to touch them. When she reached him, he lifted her veil. His fingers were steady now. He leaned close, his lips brushing her ear. "Your book needs a new ending," he whispered, "because this one is better than fiction." She kissed him before the officiant gave permission. The guests laughed. Claire whooped. Ryan shook his head and smiled. It was the most perfectly imperfect beginning. Months later, the apartment smelled like warm milk and clean laundry and the faint sweetness of a baby who had just been fed. Paige sat on the couch with their daughter tucked into the curve of her arm. Small, impossibly small, with round cheeks and tiny fists clenched against the world she'd only recently joined. The baby's eyes were closed. Her breathing was the softest sound in the room. Nathan came in from the kitchen, carrying a bottle he'd warmed without being asked. He kissed the top of Paige's head, then scooped the baby up with one arm. An absurd sight, this enormous man cradling something so tiny against his broad chest, and settled into the chair across from her. He looked down at the baby's face and spoke to her in a low, serious voice. "We need to talk about your sleep schedule. 3 in the morning is not a reasonable hour. I've reviewed the data and I'm not impressed." The baby yawned. "She has your dimples," he said to Paige, and the softness in his voice made her chest ache in the best possible way. He changed the diaper without complaint, adjusted the baby against his shoulder, and swayed gently until the tiny body went limp with sleep. Paige watched him, this man who designed buildings and held their daughter like she was the most important structure he'd ever been trusted with, and felt a fullness she didn't have words for, not even on the page. She opened her laptop. Nathan glanced over her shoulder. His eyes widened. "Are you writing another scene like that?" She closed the laptop with a sharp snap. Her ears turned crimson. He grinned, the crooked grin, the dangerous one. "I'll take that as a yes. You'll take that as none of your business." He laughed, quiet, shaking, pressing his lips together to keep the sound from escaping, and she bit the inside of her cheek so hard it almost hurt, because the baby had just fallen asleep, and if either of them laughed any louder it would all be over. They sat there, him in the chair, baby on his chest, her on the couch, laptop closed, face flushed, smiling at the ceiling. The tattoo was still there, hidden beneath the elastic of her sweatpants, his name in cursive on her skin, the most beautiful mistake she'd ever made. Leave your comment and share this story with someone special. It truly helps us keep bringing new stories to you. And if you want to follow every chapter of this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference.